Folks, there is a distinct tipping point in the timeline of any nation where a head of state stops being a mere nuisance to the establishment and starts becoming an actual target. It does not happen just because they are loud, and it certainly does not happen just because they are polling well or showing weakness. No, the crosshairs only come out when they actually start getting things done. We are talking about that critical pivot from giving nice speeches to building actual systems, from empty symbolism to tangible consequences, and from performing morality to constructing a new political architecture. That specific moment has a designation, my friends. It is nothing less than the danger zone of history. And right now we need to turn our eyes to Burkina Faso, because in the very first week of January 2026, the authorities in Ouagadougou went public with a bombshell claim that they neutralized a conspiracy set for the night of January 3rd. We are looking at a scenario described explicitly as an assassination plot and a coup attempt designed to take out Captain Ibrahim Traore. Now, I need you to lean in and listen closely, because I am not standing here trying to sell you a bill of goods based on panic or hysteria. I am here to offer you absolute clarity. Because whether this assassination attempt is proven in a court of law or remains a state allegation, the mere fact that it exists matters for a much more profound reason. It serves as a flashing red light, telling us that Burkina Faso is not just going through a crisis. Burkina Faso is locked in a high-stakes contest. This is a brawl over who actually holds the title deed to the state, a struggle over who gives orders to the men with guns, and a fight over which foreign phone calls are allowed to be answered. Ultimately, it is a battle to decide if the Sahel is going to remain a zone managed by outsiders, or if it will finally become a region that defines its own destiny. If you stick with me through this breakdown, you are going to walk away with 3 critical insights, starting with the undeniable pattern behind why specific African leaders get targeted. Number 2, we are going to dissect the rigid structure that separates the polite talk of sovereignty from the gritty reality of true independence. And number 3, we will look at the concrete solutions Africa needs to engineer so that national transformation does not get buried in the grave, along with one single man. So let's get into it. In the world of international power politics, the vocabulary is always incredibly polite. But make no mistake, the underlying logic is absolutely brutal. They love to throw around buzzwords like democracy, they will preach about stability, and they will lecture you on human rights. And sure, those concepts have value, but if you want to be a serious observer, you have to ask the uncomfortable question, who is the referee? Deciding when those rules apply. Because when you look at how power operates in the real world, it rewards utility and compliance, and it ruthlessly punishes anything that disrupts the status quo. And the cleverest trick is that they rebrand that punishment as humanitarian concern. This isn't me being cynical, folks. This is just raw political science 101. So, when you hear about an assassination attempt in a fragile state, don't just look at it as a crime scene. View it as a signal flare, indicating that someone believes the leader has stepped over an invisible red line. That line is almost always crossed when a leader dares to touch 3 specific rails. First, he puts his hands on the money, the contracts, the rent-seeking, the foreign financing, and military resource corridor. Second, he messes with the security apparatus, changing who trains the army, who provides the intelligence, and who sets the strategic priorities. And third, he tries to rewrite the story, the narrative that dictates who is considered a legitimate statesman and who is branded a criminal. Money, security, and the narrative. When a leader starts meddling with that holy trinity, he walks right into the danger zone. Now, I am not going to sit here and romanticize this, because this zone can birth legendary heroes, but it can just as easily produce absolute tyrants. The goal here isn't hero worship. The goal is to understand the machinery, because the African continent has watched this exact same movie play out over and over again. A charismatic leader emerges, hope skyrockets, the pressure cooker heats up, internal traitors start looking for a payout. External leverage kicks in, and suddenly the future gets cancelled. We have to break that cycle, but you cannot destroy a pattern that you are too afraid to call by its real name. Let's zoom out and place Burkina Faso into the larger context of what the continent is facing as we move deeper into 2026. Africa is currently buckling under several massive pressure points, all hitting at the same time. Pressure point number 1. Elections are no longer just civic events. They are being treated like full-blown security operations. Just look at East Africa in recent weeks. Over in Uganda, just days before the election on January 15th, 2026, the government clamped down hard to ban live broadcasts of protests and unauthorized marches. International reporters on the ground described a suffocating environment closing in on opposition activities and public free speech. Whether you are a fan of the government or a critic, the structural reality is undeniable. When the ballot box is managed through brute force and censorship, society walks away learning exactly one lesson. The lesson is that power is never negotiated, it is enforced. And once that idea spreads, the military starts thinking they are the supreme court of the land. Pressure point number 2, national debt is mutating into a question of national sovereignty. In early January 2026, Ethiopia managed to hammer out a draft restructuring deal with a consortium of bondholders. This was tied to its defaulted international bond, part of a massive scramble to get back to debt sustainability after the crash of 2023. Again, do not glaze over and treat this as some distant, boring economic story. Debt restructuring is just hardball politics wearing a suit and tie, because your debt dictates what your country can spend, what it can import, and ultimately how it survives. So let's be clear. When your state is financially backed into a corner, your independence becomes entirely conditional on someone else's mood. Pressure point number 3. We are seeing coup leaders scrubbing their records and normalizing themselves through elections, specifically in Guinea. In early January 2026, the highest court stamped its approval on Mamadi Doumbouya's landslide victory in a presidential race held late in December 2025. Now you might argue that this represents stability, while others will call it managed legitimacy. But the deeper issue lurking beneath the surface is this. Across the African continent, we are witnessing a seismic shift in governance. A new phenomenon where the rigid lines between military juntas and democratic institutions are blurring into a complex, unprecedented hybrid. It is no longer a binary choice between the barracks and the parliament. Instead, we are seeing a calculated evolution where men in fatigues are trading their combat boots for campaign trails, seeking to legitimize their authority through the ballot box. This is the volatile reality on the ground. So, when analysts ask why Burkina Faso feels like a powder keg right now, the answer isn't simple. The instability isn't isolated to Ouagadougou. It is a contagion spreading across the entire Sahel region. Now we need to pivot and zoom in on one specific loaded term that keeps coming up in every headline and diplomatic cable: sovereignty. You hear it shouted at rallies and whispered in diplomatic corridors. But let's be clear, not everyone using that word is speaking the same language, and the definitions are clashing violently. To truly grasp the high-stakes game playing out in the Sahel's danger zone, we have to juxtapose it against a completely different battlefront: the struggle for economic independence and supervision. Take a look at West Africa. In Ghana, right at the top of January 2026, President John Dramani Mahama dropped a statement that should make every geopolitical observer sit up and take notice. He explicitly talked about Ghana beginning the arduous process of exiting its program with the International Monetary Fund. But he didn't just talk about leaving, he emphasized doing so with dignity, standing as equal partners rather than beggars at the gate. Make no mistake, folks, choosing the word dignity wasn't just a flourish for the speechwriters. It was a calculated political declaration. Because signing onto an IMF bailout isn't just about cashing a check. It means signing away a chunk of your autonomy. It means accepting a parent-child relationship defined by strict oversight, quarterly reviews, and rigid targets that dictate your domestic policy. Remember Ghana's arrangement with the fund, approved back in the heat of the economic crisis in 2023, was a massive multi-year lifeline valued at $3 billion, designed to stop the bleeding. But I want to peel back the layers and look at the underlying philosophy here, because this goes beyond just dollars and cents. Sure, these financial rescue packages can be critical. They stop the bleeding, stabilize the currency, and prevent total systemic collapse. But that stability comes with a heavy price tag. There is an old axiom in international finance: when you borrow under supervision, you govern under permission. You lose the wheel of your own ship. So when a head of state promises an exit with dignity, he is signaling to his people, we may have needed the fire department to put out the blaze, but we are not going to let them move into the guest room permanently. Now this is where the rubber meets the road. Delivering a stirring speech is the easy part. Executing that vision without crashing the economy is where the real work begins. The hardest part isn't just signing the exit papers and walking away from foreign supervision. The real test is maintaining fiscal discipline when the babysitter is gone. The temptation to open the treasury is always there, spending cash to secure votes, borrowing against the future to buy popularity today, or inflating campaign promises beyond what the budget can actually hold. Ghana is setting a benchmark here for the whole region. True sovereignty isn't just about telling foreign powers to back off. It is about building the internal steel and institutional muscle to govern responsibly without needing a bailout every decade. And that concept, internal capacity, is the perfect bridge to discuss what is happening next door in Burkina Faso. Because that nation isn't just battling armed insurgents in the north. Burkina Faso is fighting a much deeper structural war against the reality that its own state institutions are paper-thin and constantly under siege from within and without. In that context, an assassination attempt isn't just a crime, it is a violent referendum on who gets to define sovereignty. It is an attempt to rewrite the rules of the state with a bullet. Let's dig into the specifics of the latest reports coming out of Ouagadougou because the details are alarming. Earlier in January 2026, the Burkinabe security minister took to national television with a chilling announcement. He detailed a sinister operation that was reportedly scheduled to go down on the night of January 3rd. The objective: total destabilization through targeted hits, starting with the neutralization of Captain Ibrahim Traore himself, either by taking him out at close range or storming his private residence. Government officials claim they have already cracked down, making several arrests, and that a full-scale investigation is currently tearing through the ranks to find the conspirators. The official narrative didn't stop there. It pointed fingers directly at the old guard, alleging connections to the former ousted leader Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. Now we have to be responsible here as observers. These are allegations coming directly from the state apparatus. They haven't been vetted in a court of law, and we haven't seen the evidence files yet. But the veracity of the claim is almost secondary to what it tells us about the atmosphere in the country right now. Even as accusations, they expose the terrifying fragility of Burkina Faso's political ecosystem. The alleged plot follows a textbook coup d'etat playbook: decapitate the leadership, paralyze the loyalists, and seize the levers of power. When a government broadcasts this kind of threat to the world, it is sending a message. It is declaring that this is no longer about governance. It is an existential fight for survival. They are saying, we are not in normal political times. This is survival politics at its rawest. And why does a nation descend to this level of desperation? Because in fragile states, power isn't passed like a baton in a relay race. It is wrestled away through force, coercion, and backroom deals. So we have to ask the hard question. If Captain Traoré is constantly in the crosshairs, who exactly finds him so intolerable, and what is their endgame? This is where the information war gets murky. If you are not careful, you fall into the trap of lazy narratives. Some will scream that it is entirely a foreign conspiracy. Others will insist it is strictly internal rot. You'll hear claims of ideological purity versus claims of naked personal ambition. The reality: it is usually much uglier and more complicated. It is a cocktail of everything. Internal rivals smell blood in the water and look for an opening. External powers look for leverage to regain lost influence, and everyone uses high-minded ideological language to recruit foot soldiers. It is not just about the plot itself. What is really at stake is the broader geopolitical project taking shape across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. I'm talking about the Alliance of Sahel States, or the AES. And when you talk about the AES, you can't just gloss over it like a casual observer. You have to ask, what exactly are they trying to construct in the desert? And why does that construction terrify the traditional power brokers so much? Let's go deeper. Too many Western commentators look at the Sahel and just see one thing: chaos. But chaos is a lazy label. We stick on things when we don't want to do the homework to understand the structure beneath. Just look at late December of last year when the leaders of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger gathered to solidify their pact. We are witnessing a massive strategic pivot in the region where leaders have met and officially greenlit large-scale joint combat operations to crack down on extremist violence. They are backing this up by unveiling a formidable new joint battalion consisting of thousands of troops operating under the flag of the Alliance of Sahel States. Now, the pundits inside the Beltway can go back and forth debating whether these specific tactical missions are going to hit their targets or achieve total victory. But honestly, the geopolitical significance here dwarfs the immediate body count or battlefield statistics because the alliance is making a definitive declaration of intent. They are signaling that they will coordinate their own security protocols completely outside the traditional regional architecture that used to hold the reins. And make no mistake, this alliance is inextricably linked to another seismic shift. These nations have effectively severed the umbilical cord with ECOWAS and have either expelled or significantly dialed back the footprint of specific Western military forces, all while forging rapidly tightening security bonds with the Russian Federation. Whether you sit on the left or the right, whether you applaud this move or condemn it, you simply cannot ignore the geopolitical semaphore flags they are waving. They are literally rewriting the rulebook on who gets a seat at the table as a legitimate security partner. And you have to pay attention to the pattern emerging here. It is a fundamental rule of statecraft. When you swap out your security partnerships, you inevitably alter the pipelines of intelligence. And when you change those intelligence flows, you fundamentally shift the internal balance of power. Once those internal scales tip, you inadvertently manufacture brand new adversaries. Consequently, the danger zone expands exponentially. We saw a prime example of this volatility in December of 2026, when Burkina Faso detained Nigerian Air Force personnel following an emergency landing, only releasing them after some intense diplomatic backchanneling. That specific episode, which might look like a minor blip on the radar, actually peeled back the layers to reveal the raw, pulsating tension gripping the entire region. We are talking about hypersensitivity regarding airspace sovereignty, deep-seated suspicion, cross-border jitters, and the prevailing perception that any unexpected movement is tantamount to an intrusion. Folks, this is not political theater or posturing for the cameras. This is a region on a hair-trigger alert where every single maneuver is scrutinized and interpreted as a strategic power play. Now we need to pivot to another flashpoint that exposed just how combustible these alliances have become, specifically looking at the situation in Benin. In early December of 2026, authorities there launched a full-scale investigation into an attempted coup d'etat. Intelligence reporting suggested there was suspected foreign sponsorship involved with direct links to the region's broader messy rivalries. Whether every single allegation stands up in court remains to be seen, but the takeaway lesson is undeniable. When regional blocs start drifting like tectonic plates, when new alliances calcify, and when borders morph into political battlegrounds, the logic of the coup begins to travel. It migrates through the officer corps. It moves through illicit financial channels. It rides on the back of deep-seated grievances, and it gets amplified by whispers of external encouragement. So when Ibrahim Traore speaks about the winter, do not mistake it for mere poetic flourish or rhetoric. He is broadcasting from inside a geopolitical blast furnace. And this brings us to the single most threatening concept for any extractive global order, the proof of concept. Look, a protest, you can ignore a protest, you can contain a riot, you can issue a press release condemning civil unrest. But a proof of concept is an entirely different animal. A proof of concept happens when a leader shows, even for a fleeting moment, that the board can be set up differently. That is the variable that terrifies established systems more than anything else. Because the moment the average citizen witnesses a functioning alternative, the most dangerous question in politics arises: if they can pull that off, why can't we? And once that question takes root in the public imagination, managing the status quo becomes infinitely more difficult. So the danger zone isn't really about the individual leader. It is about what that individual represents operationally to the masses. But here lies the classic trap that African politics often stumbles into. We tend to hyper-personalize transformation. We condense an entire movement into one man's face. We reduce a national project to the breath of a single human being. We equate sovereignty with one man's stump speeches. The tragedy is that when that man is removed from the equation, the entire project implodes. That is how futures are strangled in the crib. To really understand the stakes in Burkina Faso today, you have to rewind the clock to the Sahel's most infamous interrupted future. You have to invoke the name Thomas Sankara. Now, Sankara wasn't considered a threat just because he was loud or charismatic. He was dangerous to the establishment because he attempted to govern using moral logic. He went after elite privilege with a sledgehammer. He flat out rejected dependency. He turned development into a domestic discipline rather than an international charity performance. And he didn't just critique the system. He tried to build a working alternative right inside the belly of the beast. He renamed the nation Burkina Faso the land of upright people. He cut out the pomp and circumstance of leadership. He pursued radical self-sufficiency. He pushed massive vaccination and literacy drives. He elevated women's political participation in ways that made the traditional patriarchal order squirm. Now, I am not here to romanticize the past. Every revolutionary project is riddled with contradictions. Every leader has their blind spots. But history delivers a brutal lecture here. Sankara didn't fall because he failed to inspire the people. Sankara fell because he generated fear that a successful example was being born. And how did he go down? Not by a foreign invasion force. He was taken out by internal betrayal, a coup orchestrated from within his own revolution. And after his assassination, many of the radical reforms were rolled back. External relationships were normalized, and the global order let out a sigh of relief. This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory. This is a familiar rhythm in geopolitics. And that rhythm carries one central instruction. A vision without insulation is just a funeral waiting for a date on the calendar. So, when we discuss Traoré today, whether you admire his guts, question his methods, or fear his trajectory, Sankara's lesson has to be the lens through which you view this, because the most dangerous mistake is believing that righteousness serves as a bulletproof vest. Righteousness is absolutely not protection. Let's be absolutely clear about what guarantees national survival. In this volatile era, it is not just about individuals, it is about structure. Robust institutions serve as your shield. Strategic redundancy is your safety net. Strong alliances and operational systems are the ultimate form of protection against collapse. We need to move past simply diagnosing the crisis. We have done enough of that. It is time to shift gears and start prescribing concrete, actionable remedies to fix the rot. If Burkina Faso is indeed drifting into this high-risk danger zone, and the administration's own intelligence reports suggest that it is, then the critical question isn't just identifying who is plotting in the shadows. The far more profound question is what infrastructure must be built right now to ensure that these backroom plots do not dictate the future of the nation. I am going to lay out a comprehensive 5-point strategic framework. These solutions are hard-hitting, they are demanding, and they are absolutely necessary for survival. Solution number 1, implement a depersonalized transformation of the state. We have to understand that no national project can survive if it lives and dies inside the mind of a single man. You must build a highly visible second tier of command, a clear chain of succession that the world can see. But don't stop there. Build a credible third line of defense as well. You need to establish leadership pipelines that are transparent and known to the public, ensuring the movement is bigger than the individual. The reason is simple. When the public is led to believe that hope resides solely in one person, the opposition realizes they only need one bullet to end the revolution. That isn't politics, folks. That is a hostage situation waiting to happen. This brings us to solution number 2. You must professionalize your national security apparatus beyond mere personal allegiance. In contested regimes, leaders too often fall into the trap of relying exclusively on personal loyalty for safety. But here is the reality check. Loyalty is not a military doctrine. Loyalty is a fleeting sentiment, an emotion that can change with the wind. What you actually need are rigorous systems, professional intelligence, fusion centers, disciplined vetting protocols, advanced counter-infiltration capabilities, and a security culture that is sworn to protect the state constitution, not just the guy sitting in the big chair. Because history shows us that a security apparatus that is fractured by internal factions effectively becomes a laboratory for planning the next coup. Solution number 3 is about fiscal sanity, establishing rigorous economic discipline once the campaign slogans fade. Look at the situation in Ghana as a prime case study. You simply cannot stand at the podium chanting about national sovereignty while simultaneously driving the economy off a cliff with reckless governance. You cannot declare political independence on one day and then turn around and borrow irresponsibly from foreign creditors the next. True sovereignty requires hard-nosed revenue capacity, transparent budgeting processes, a strategic industrial policy, and realistic, mature debt management. If you fail to do this, the same external control you fought against will return, only this time it will be dressed in a different suit and tie, wielding a loan agreement instead of a gun. Solution number 4 involves winning the information war. You must build a resilient narrative infrastructure. Make no mistake, the modern battlefield is not just on the ground, it is in the mind. If you do not have the capacity to tell your own story, your enemies will narrate it for you and they will cast you as the criminal. Once the world views you as a criminal, your elimination becomes justifiable in the eyes of the international community. So, you need to establish credible public information systems and rapid response fact-checking networks that can dismantle lies in real time. You need to forge partnerships with diaspora media and support independent investigative journalism that has the teeth to expose both external manipulation and internal corruption. This isn't about propaganda, it's about credibility. We are talking about delivering the truth with speed, because in the 24-hour news cycle, a slow truth will always lose to a fast-moving lie. Finally, solution number 5, continental shielding. We need to treat Pan-Africanism as a concrete form of protection, not just poetic rhetoric for speeches. This is the strategy that African nations often avoid because it is expensive, politically costly, and requires genuine sacrifice. But you need to listen closely to why this matters. When a single African leader stands up to challenge the systems of extraction and dependency, the empire does not respond locally. It responds with a coordinated global backlash. Therefore, Africa's response cannot remain fragmented. Continental shielding means providing legitimate diplomatic cover when the international pressure starts to intensify. It means fostering deep economic cooperation so that attempts to isolate a specific nation will fail to cripple its economy. It requires high-level intelligence coordination to stop cross-border destabilization and a unified refusal to let any single state become a sacrificial lamb to warn off others. Pan-Africanism must evolve into a protective security architecture, not just a festival speech, because while standing alone might look heroic, standing alone is also usually fatal. Let's wrap this up with some precision. History does not punish leaders simply for being loud or controversial. History punishes them for being effective. It punishes them for becoming living proof that a different way is possible. As we survey the geopolitical landscape in these early days of 2026, the signs across the continent are undeniable. The old playbook is still very much active. We are seeing elections being managed through restriction and force. We see debt negotiations being used to shape sovereignty, military transitions becoming permanent fixtures through the ballot box, and regional blocs forming under immense pressure, creating dangerous new rivalries. And specifically in Burkina Faso, the stakes could not be higher, with the state claiming a major plot was foiled just recently on January 3rd. So I am not going to leave you with rumors or gossip. I am going to leave you with a fundamental question. What concrete systems will Africa build to ensure that political transformation does not die when one man's heart stops beating? Because every time Africa fails to protect its disruptors, the message sent to the world is crystal clear. The message is that change will be punished and fear will be enforced. But if the continent finally learns to institutionalize transformation, to distribute leadership duties, to discipline its budgets, to professionalize its security forces, to control its own narrative, and to shield one another from attack, then history will discover a continent that does not just produce visionary leaders who burn out. It will produce survivable, sustainable futures. That is the assignment on the table, and that is the warning.